The door creaked open, and my heart stopped. In the dead of night, the silhouette of my stepfather, Richard, loomed in the doorway, his shadow stretching across my bedroom floor like a specter of judgment. I wasn't alone, and that was the problem. I was 17, tangled in the sheets with Ethan, the boy who made my world make sense. We'd been careful, or so I thought, sneaking moments in the quiet of my room in our small Ohio town, where secrets like ours were buried deep or destroyed. Ethan's breath was warm against my neck, his hand resting on my chest, when Richard's heavy footsteps shattered the silence. The air turned to ice. My stepfather's eyes, glinting in the dim light, locked onto us, and I knew life as I knew it was over. I'd always known Richard as the man who married my mother when I was 10. He was stoic, a former Marine with a jawline like granite and a voice that commanded attention. He'd brought order to our chaotic household after Dad left, but his rules were ironclad, his expectations suffocating. Church every Sunday, no questions asked. Curfew at 10. And though he never said it outright, I knew his views on people like me, people who loved differently. Traditional family values. He'd grunt over dinner, quoting the pastor like gospel. I learned to keep my head down to hide who I was. Until Ethan. Ethan was the new kid at Lincoln High, arriving senior year with a leather jacket, a crooked smile, and a fearless way of carrying himself that made my heart race. He was everything I wasn't: bold, unapologetic, free. We met in art class, bonding over charcoal sketches and whispered jokes. By spring, we were stealing kisses behind the bleachers, our secret blooming in the cracks of a town that would never understand. Ethan made me feel alive, like I could breathe for the first time. But now, with Richard standing there, our secret was exposed, raw and vulnerable, like a wound under harsh light. "Get up," Richard said, his voice low, dangerous. Ethan scrambled to his feet, pulling on his shirt, his face pale but defiant. I wanted to scream, to beg, to explain, but my throat was dry, my body frozen. Richard's gaze flicked to Ethan, then back to me. "You," he said, pointing at me. "Stay." "You." He jerked his head toward Ethan, out. "Now." Ethan hesitated, his eyes meeting mine, a silent promise to stay if I needed him. But I shook my head, barely, terrified of what might happen if he didn't leave. He grabbed his shoes and slipped past Richard, who didn't move, didn't blink, just stood like a sentinel guarding the gates of hell. The front door clicked shut, and then it was just me and Richard, the silence between us heavier than the world. "Explain," he said, crossing his arms. His voice wasn't loud, but it carried the weight of a man who'd never been disobeyed. I sat on the edge of my bed, my hands trembling, trying to find words that wouldn't betray me further. But what could I say? That I loved Ethan? That I'd been hiding this part of myself since I was 12, terrified of what it meant in a town like ours? That every sermon, every sideways glance from neighbors felt like a blade against my skin? "I'm sorry," I whispered, my voice breaking. It was all I could manage. Richard's face didn't soften. He stepped closer, his boots thudding against the hardwood, and I braced myself for the worst. I'd heard stories, kids kicked out, disowned, worse. My mother's face flashed in my mind, her tired smile, her quiet faith in Richard's leadership. What would she think of me now? But Richard didn't yell. He didn't hit me. Instead, he sat on the chair by my desk, his broad shoulders slumping slightly, like he was carrying something heavier than anger. "You think I don't know what it's like?" he said, his voice quieter now, almost broken. I looked up, confused, my heart pounding. "You think you're the only one with secrets?" I didn't understand. Richard, the man who quoted scripture and shook hands with the mayor, had secrets? His eyes, usually so hard, were distant, like he was seeing something far beyond my room. "I was your age once," he said. "I had someone who mattered. But I made choices. I buried it. For my family. For my future." My breath caught. Was he saying what I thought he was? Richard, the man I'd feared for years, was confessing something I couldn't comprehend. He leaned forward, his elbows on his knees, and for the first time, I saw not my stepfather, but a man haunted by his own past. This world, he said, it doesn't make it easy, but you don't get to choose who you are. You only choose what you do with it. I wanted to ask 1,000 questions, but the weight of his words silenced me. He stood, his shadow retreating as he moved toward the door. "We don't talk about this again," he said, his voice firm but not cruel. "Not to your mother. Not to anyone. You understand?" I nodded, too stunned to speak. He left, closing the door softly, and I was alone with the echo of his confession. Sleep didn't come that night. I lay awake, replaying his words, trying to reconcile the man I knew with the one who just bared his soul. Richard had a secret, one that mirrored mine, and it changed everything. But it didn't erase the fear, the shame, or the love I felt for Ethan. If anything, it made it all more complicated. The next morning, Ethan texted me. "You okay?" I stared at the screen, my fingers hovering over the keys. I wasn't okay. I was terrified, confused, and tethered to a secret that now bound me to Richard in a way I couldn't untangle. But I typed back, "I'm fine. Meet me at the park." I needed to see him, to feel the one thing that still made sense. At the park, under the oak tree where we'd first kissed, Ethan pulled me close, his arms a shield against the world. "What happened after I left?" he asked, his voice soft but urgent. I wanted to tell him everything, Richard's confession, the weight of his words, but I couldn't. Not yet. Instead, I kissed him, pouring every ounce of fear and hope into it, knowing we were walking a tightrope with no net below. The park became our sanctuary, a place where Ethan and I could steal moments away from prying eyes. But even there, under the sprawling oak, I felt Richard's shadow lingering. His confession had cracked something open inside me, a mix of relief and dread. He wasn't just my stepfather anymore. He was a mirror, reflecting a life I might be doomed to live. School was a battlefield. Lincoln High was a small world, and gossip spread like wildfire. By Monday, whispers followed me down the halls. Someone had seen Ethan leave my house that night, and in a town like ours, assumptions were as good as truth. "Faggot," someone muttered as I passed, the word sharp as a blade. I kept my head down, my heart racing, but Ethan, he walked taller, his jaw set, daring anyone to say it to his face. I envied his courage, but I couldn't match it. Not yet. At home, Richard acted like nothing had happened. He sat at the dinner table, carving roast beef, asking Mom about her day at the library. I watched him, searching for cracks in his facade, but he was impenetrable. Mom noticed my silence, her brow furrowing. "You okay, Caleb?" she asked, her voice soft. I nodded, forcing a smile, but Richard's eyes met mine for a split second, a silent warning to keep our secret buried. Ethan and I started meeting in secret, sneaking out to the old quarry at the edge of town. It was a desolate place, all jagged rocks and still water, but it was ours. We'd sit on the cliffs, sharing dreams of escaping to a city where we could be ourselves. "New York," Ethan would say, his eyes bright. "We'll get an apartment, go to art school, live loud." I wanted to believe him, but Richard's words echoed. "You don't get to choose who you are. You only choose what you do with it." One night, as we lay on a blanket under the stars, Ethan asked about Richard. "What did he say to you that night?" His voice was gentle, but I felt the weight of the question. I told him the truth, most of it, that Richard had caught us, that he'd been angry but hadn't thrown me out. I left out his confession, the part about his own past. It felt too raw, too personal, like betraying a trust one didn't fully understand. Ethan's face darkened. "He's dangerous, Caleb. People like him. They bury their truth and expect you to do the same." I wanted to argue, to defend Richard, but I couldn't. Ethan was right, but he didn't know the whole story. He didn't know Richard had once loved someone too, someone he'd let go to fit into a world that demanded conformity. The tension at home grew thicker. Mom started asking questions, why I was so quiet, why I was out so late. Richard's silence was louder than ever, his eyes following me like a hawk. I felt trapped, caught between the life I wanted with Ethan and the life Richard had chosen, one of sacrifice, of hiding. I started to wonder if he was right. Maybe love like ours was a luxury we couldn't afford. Then came the night that changed everything. It was a Friday, and Ethan and I were at the quarry, lost in each other, when headlights cut through the darkness. A truck roared up, and before I could react, 3 guys from school, led by Jake, the football star with a grudge, jumped out. "Well, look at this," Jake sneered, his voice dripping with venom. "The town fags, out in the open." Ethan stood, shielding me, his fists clenched. "Back off, Jake," he said, his voice steady. But Jake wasn't alone, and they weren't there to talk. The first punch landed on Ethan's jaw, and I screamed, lunging forward, but someone grabbed me, pinning my arms. Blows rained down on Ethan, and I fought to break free, my vision blurring with tears and rage. By the time they sped off, laughing, Ethan was crumpled on the ground, blood streaking his face. I dropped to my knees beside him, sobbing, checking for wounds. I enter extraordinary strength, a defiance born from pain, and Ethan's blood on my hands. I drove Ethan to the hospital, my hands shaking on the wheel. His face was bruised, his lips split, but he was alive, and that was all that mattered. In the ER, he gripped my hand, his eyes fierce despite the pain. "Don't let them win, Caleb," he whispered. "Don't hide." I wanted to promise him I wouldn't, but fear still clung to me, a shadow I couldn't shake. The doctor said Ethan had a concussion and cracked ribs, but would recover. I stayed by his side, ignoring the nurses' curious glances. When his parents arrived, they thanked me, their voices tight with worry. I didn't tell them why he'd been attacked. I couldn't, not when I was still figuring out how to live with the truth myself. At home, Richard was waiting. Mom was asleep, but he was in the living room, a beer in hand, his face unreadable. "Where were you?" he asked, his tone sharp. I told him about the attack, leaving out the details of why. His jaw tightened, and for a moment I thought he'd explode. But he didn't. "You're lucky it wasn't worse," he said, his voice low. "You need to be more careful." Careful. The word stung. It wasn't about being careful. It was about being invisible. I wanted to scream at him, to ask why he'd chosen to hide, why he expected me to do the same. But I didn't. I went to my room, locked the door, and cried for Ethan, for myself, for the life we couldn't have here. The next day, Ethan was released, and I brought him to his house. His parents were kind, but I saw the questions in their eyes. Ethan didn't care. He held my hand in front of them, his grip firm, a silent challenge to the world. I envied his bravery, but I felt the weight of our town's judgment pressing down. At school, the whispers grew louder. Jake and his friends strutted like they'd won, and I hated myself for staying silent. I started avoiding Ethan, not because I didn't love him, but because I was terrified. Every creak of the floorboards at home, every glance from Richard felt like a warning. One night, I overheard him talking to Mom, his voice low. "He's just a kid," he said. "He'll figure it out." Figure it out. Like my love for Ethan was a phase, a mistake to be fixed. I wanted to hate him, but his confession from that first night lingered, a ghost I couldn't exorcise. Ethan noticed my distance. At the park, he confronted me, his eyes blazing. "You're pulling away, Caleb." "What?" I tried to explain, the fear, the shame, Richard's shadow, but the words felt hollow. "I'm not ashamed of us," he said, his voice breaking. "Are you?" The question gutted me. I wasn't ashamed of him, but I was ashamed of myself, of my cowardice. That night, I made a decision. I couldn't keep living in halves, torn between who I was and who I was supposed to be. I went to Richard, found him in his study, and told him everything about the attack, about Jake, about how much Ethan meant to me. His face was stone, but his eyes flickered with something, regret, maybe, or recognition. "You can't change the world, Caleb," he said, "but you can change yourself." He was wrong. I didn't need to change myself. I needed to fight for myself, for Ethan, for the life we deserved. The next day, I went to school and reported Jake and his friends to the principal. It was a small act, but it felt like breaking chains. The school suspended them, and though the whispers didn't stop, they grew quieter. Ethan smiled at me, his bruises fading, and for the first time, I felt like I could breathe. But Richard's words stayed with me. He'd chosen a different path, one of sacrifice and silence. I didn't want that life, but I couldn't hate him for it. He was a product of his time, his choices shaped by a world even less forgiving than mine. I started to see him not as a villain, but as a man trapped by his own fears, just as I'd been. Summer came, and with it, graduation. Ethan and I stood together at the ceremony, our caps tilted defiantly, our hands brushing in the crowd. We'd survived the year, but the scars remained. Ethan's physical, mine emotional. We'd applied to art schools in New York, dreaming of a life beyond Ohio's small-minded streets. When the acceptance letters came, we celebrated under our oak tree, laughing and crying, knowing we were close to freedom. Richard and I reached an uneasy truce. He didn't talk about that night, and neither did I, but something had shifted. He'd started looking at me differently, not with approval, but with a quiet respect. One evening, he called me into his study, a rare occurrence. "Your mother's proud of you," he said, his voice gruff. "So am I." It wasn't an apology, but it was something. A crack in the wall he'd built around himself. Mom noticed a change too. She started asking about Ethan, her questions gentle, probing. I told her the truth one night, my heart pounding as I said the words, "I love him, Mom." She cried, not out of anger, but because she'd known deep down and hated that I had to hide. She hugged me, her arms warm, and for the first time, I felt like her son again, not just Richard's stepson. But the town wasn't done with us. Jake's suspension ended, and he was back, his anger simmering. One night, as Ethan and I walked home from the quarry, his truck pulled up again. This time, I didn't freeze. I stepped in front of Ethan, my voice steady. "You touch him again, and I'll make sure everyone knows what you did." Jake laughed, but he drove off, and I knew we'd won a small victory. Moving day came fast. Ethan and I packed our lives into a beat-up van, our art supplies and dreams stuffed in the back. Richard helped load the boxes, his hands steady, his face unreadable. As we said goodbye, he pulled me aside. "Don't make the same mistakes I did," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "Live your truth, Caleb." I nodded, my throat tight, and hugged him, feeling the weight of his past and the hope of my future. New York was everything we dreamed, loud, chaotic, alive. Our apartment was tiny, the walls thin, but it was ours. Ethan's paintings filled the space, vibrant and bold, while my sketches lined the walls, a testament to our shared journey. We walked hand in hand through the city, unafraid, our love no longer a secret but a badge of honor. Years later, I look back on that night, Richard's silhouette in my doorway, the secret we shared, and it still haunts me, but not with fear. It's a reminder of how far I've come, how far we've all come. Ethan and I built a life in New York, our art gaining recognition, our love growing stronger. We visit Ohio sometimes, not to relive the pain, but to honor the place where we found each other. Richard changed too. After we left, he started attending a different church, one that preached love over judgment. He and Mom came to our first gallery show, his eyes lingering on my sketches, Ethan's paintings. He didn't say much, but he hugged us both, his arms strong but gentle. "I'm sorry," he said later, over coffee, his voice thick with regret. "I should have done better." I forgave him, not because it was easy, but because it was right. Mom became our biggest supporter, her library job, now a platform to advocate for inclusivity. She sends us articles about small-town change, about kids like us finding their voices. Our town isn't perfect, but it's trying, and that's enough for now. Ethan and I got married last year, under an oak tree in a New York park, our vows a promise to never hide again. The ring on my finger catches the light, a reminder of the boy who refused to let me fade into the shadows. We're not just surviving anymore, we're thriving, our love a testament to the power of truth. The secret Richard and I shared that night, It wasn't just mine or his. It was a bridge, fragile but real, connecting our past to a future where love doesn't need to hide. I think of him sometimes, the man who chose silence, but gave me the chance to choose differently. And I'm grateful, not for the pain, but for the strength it gave me to live my truth, to love without fear, to be free.